Event Squid, software that thinks like you and works like 8 of you.
Hey folks, it's Matt from Event Squid with another system tutorial. Today, I want to walk through the full guest registration method. The full record method gives you the ability to present a full registration form to invited guests. Let's take a look at how to configure a full guest registration experience from the ground up. First, enter the Registration tab, then select the Registration Items tool on the left. You'll see at the top that we have two custom profiles, one form for speakers and the other for attendees. In this example, we're going to set up the attendee registration form so that if they decide to bring a guest, the guest will get to fill out a full registration form and pick from the optional activity list. First, create a new enhanced registration item by clicking the New Item button. Name the item Guest Pass. Include this item in the event registration group. Then click the Create button. Set the base item price to 100. This item is going to act as our trigger. A trigger is an item that awards the user with guest slots based on a rule that you predetermine in the guest setup tool. We'll get to the trigger setup shortly. Now, we need to make sure we add the guest pass item to the attendee profile. That way, primary registrants under the attendee profile will see the option to purchase a guest pass for $100 when registering. Click the Custom Profiles tool on the left. Then click the pencil icon on the right side of the tool to enter the profile editor. In the Profile Items section, scroll down to the item pick list, then check the box next to the Guest Pass item. Okay, now that attendees have the option to purchase guests for $100, we need to configure the guest registration experience. Click the Guest Setup tool on the left side. Now, flip the switch to activate guest registration for the event. You'll see that the very first step you need to take when configuring guest registration is method selection. We'll cover this simple method in another video, but go ahead and select the full record method for now. Now, you can designate a label for guests. Remember, in our system, the term guest is used to describe any invited registrant. However, this doesn't mean that an invited registrant needs to be a guest. You might consider using the guest registration tool in a number of different scenarios, such as exhibitor team registration. For this event, we'll go ahead and keep the invited party label to guest. Let's move on to step 2 in the guest setup tool. This is where we will set up our guest trigger. As mentioned earlier, a trigger is an item that awards a registrant with additional registration slots when selected. The number of additional slots that the registrant is awarded is based on the calculation displayed to the right of the triggering item here. Check the box next to our guest pass registration item to designate that item as a trigger. To the right, in the calculation column, notice that you can predetermine the number of guests that should be awarded to the primary registrant if they pick that item. For this event, let's keep this trigger at a +1 privilege. That way, when the primary registrant selects the guest pass item, they will be awarded with an additional guest slot. Finally, on the far right, you will see a list of all event profiles that are activated for the event. For each triggering item, you are able to set which profiles should be available to the invited registrant of that triggering item. In our example, we want invited guests of attendees to register as attendees as well. Check the box next to the attendee registration profile. Now scroll down to step 3 of guest setup. In this step, we need to determine which items should be shown to primary registrants only, primary and guest registrants only. Next to each item, use the drop-down to make this determination. We'll go ahead and set each of the 3 activities to show on both primary and guest registration forms. That way, both the primary registrants and guest registrants will be able to pick between these activities when registering. Now notice the drop-down on the right. For any item that will be offered to guest registrants, you can eliminate pricing or keep pricing the same. This comes in handy if you decide to comp certain options for guest registrants that cost money for primary registrants. In this example, we'll leave all the options free for guests. In the final step of full guest setup, you can determine whether or not primary registrants should be allowed to invite guests to register themselves via email. Now, let's take a look at our guest registration experience to see what we have so far. If you're following along, make sure to register using the attendee registration profile. Then, go ahead and advance to the Make Your Selections area of the registration form. Notice that the full access item is required for primary registrants. However, remember that this item will not be shown to guest registrants. Now, click the Guest Pass item. This is our trigger. When picked, the system will award us with a guest registration slot. Finally, continue to select any of the optional activities below. Keep in mind that although these activities cost money for the primary registrant, the guest will not inquire a fee for these. Confirm selections and proceed to checkout. Just before checkout, the system will present the primary registrant with an option to add guests or check out now. If the primary registrant opts to check out now, they are allowed to return to the event website at any time to register their guests. Click the Add Guest button. Then click the Guest block. You are taken to the Guest Registration window. After entering the email address of the guest, you are enabled to invite this person via an email notification or simply complete the registration on their behalf. We'll go ahead and register our guest. If this person hasn't yet registered for an event on the EventSquid platform, the primary registrant will generate a user account for their guest through this process. If the guest has registered for an event on our platform in the past, entering their email address will retrieve their information from our database. Note that the registration experience looks identical to the primary registrant. That's because we opted to send guests through the attendee registration profile, the same exact profile that the primary registrant used. When advancing to the Make Your Selections portion of the form, you'll see the 3 items that we made available to guest registrants, the optional activities. You will also notice that these options are free for guests. However, this reveals a potential flaw in our guest registration experience. Let's assume that the guest decides to opt out of each activity. The guest will be unable to check out because they haven't selected any items. Although it's an unlikely scenario, we like to account for these types of errors ahead of time. That way, the registration is smooth sailing no matter what happens. Let's go back to the event builder and create a solution for this potential error before it occurs. First, we need to create a registration item that will only be offered to guests. Enter the Registration tab, then click the Registration Items tool on the left. Click to add a new item. Then use the enhanced registration item type. Name the item Prepaid Guest Pass. Place it in the Event Registration Item group. Keep the item free of charge. Now, set the item to Registrant Must Choose Yes. The mandatory setting will ensure that all guest registrants will automatically get this item. Now we need to ensure that this item is included in the attendee profile. Click the Custom Profiles tool on the left. Then enter the editor for the attendee registration profile. Scroll down to the item pick list and check the box next to our prepaid guest pass item. The final step is to limit the appearance of this item to guest registrants only. Remember, we don't want primary registrants to see the prepaid guest pass item since they haven't paid for their guests yet. Click the Guest Setup tool on the left. Then scroll down to Step 3. Find our prepaid guest pass item, then set the drop-down to Show Only on Guest Form. And there you have it. Let's take a look at the registration experience now. Go ahead and enter a test registration. Trigger a guest, then register your guest. Advance to the Make Your Selections portion of the registration form. Now you'll see that we have a prepaid guest pass item. It's automatically selected and the registrant is unable to deselect this option. Therefore, no matter what the guest selects, they'll always have at least one registration item in their cart, allowing them to check out. With the help of the full record guest method, you can ensure that your registration experience allows for complex and differing needs between primary and invited registrants. We hope this was helpful, and as always, let us know if you have any questions. Thanks for watching.